They say you can't pour from an empty cup. But what they never tell you is what happens when you keep pouring anyway. When your smile becomes a mask, when your kindness turns into exhaustion. When one day you realize you've given everything away and there's nothing left for you. This is the story of the empty bowl and the woman who finally stopped apologizing for being tired. I used to think I could pour from myself forever. That if I just kept giving my time, my energy, my attention, somehow I would stay full. But one morning, not long after my 56th birthday, I stood at the kitchen sink with a sponge in one hand and tears in the other, and realized I had nothing left. Nothing clever to say, no more patience to hand out like candy, no more warmth to offer everyone but myself. I was empty, not broken, not angry, just done. It didn't happen all at once. It happened in teaspoons, in silent dinners, in the forgotten calls no one returned, in the sighs I swallowed so often they began to feel like breathing. I was everyone's source until I wasn't. Until I realized I had become a bowl that kept feeding others, but hadn't been filled in years, and no one noticed. This is not a story about rage. This is not a scream. It's a whisper, a confession, a woman's quiet reckoning with her own depletion, and maybe the moment she stopped apologizing for it. Because sometimes you only learn to receive when your bowl is finally empty. I suppose it started earlier than I admitted to myself. Back when I was 49, maybe even 45, I'd have moments, small ones, where I'd forget something important. A birthday, a name, a task I'd promised to do. People would laugh, call it a senior moment or menopausal fog, and I'd play along. But deep down, it didn't feel like forgetfulness. It felt like my mind had become too crowded, too full of everyone else's needs, and mine had fallen to the very bottom of the pile. At 51, I started waking up tired. Not the kind of tired that a nap fixes, the kind of tired that lives in your bones, that makes you stare at the wall in the morning and ask yourself, is this all I'm doing today, just surviving again? I was still doing all the things, working, cooking, caretaking, planning birthday parties, visiting my mother in the assisted living center, checking in on my daughter during her first heartbreak, being the emotional airbag for my husband whenever he crashed from work stress. I kept doing it. Of course I did. That's who I was, the dependable one, the one who held everything together. But I had started to notice something strange. No one ever asked how I was. Not really. They asked what was for dinner, where the keys were, whether I'd paid the water bill. But no one looked me in the eye and said, "How are you really?" Not even once. And the more that happened, the more I shrank into myself, like a sponge drying out under the sun, still shaped like the woman I used to be, but harder, cracked, brittle. I didn't resent them. That's the strange part. I didn't feel anger, not the kind you can name. I felt grief, like I was mourning a woman who still walked around wearing my clothes. A woman I used to know who used to laugh at her own jokes in the car and secretly sing to sad songs in the laundry room when no one was home. Where had she gone? It was during my 56th year, an age I hadn't given much thought to, that something finally snapped. Not loudly, not with fireworks, with silence. I was standing in the kitchen one night. The kids were grown and gone. My husband was in the living room watching a show I had no interest in. I could hear the laughter track through the wall, but it felt like it belonged to a different world. I was scrubbing a plate that didn't need scrubbing, just moving in slow circles because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. And suddenly I stopped. My hands dropped to my sides. I looked out the window. The sky was navy blue, already sinking into night. And I thought, is this it? Not with despair, just with clarity. Is this really it? Is this what I've poured everything into just to stand alone at a sink at the end of the day, washing a plate that no one will remember? I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just knew in a way I hadn't let myself know before that I was done. Not with my life, but with this quiet betrayal of myself I had been committing for years. The betrayal of always saying yes. The betrayal of always showing up even when I had nothing left. The betrayal of being generous with everyone but myself. They say you can't pour from an empty cup. But I was never a cup. I was a bowl, wide open, always available. And people kept dipping into me, expecting me to always be there. And I had let them. I trained them, in fact, to believe I didn't need refilling. But here's the truth. No one tells you about being that kind of woman if you never say no, if you never take space, if you never admit your emptiness. They will never notice when you're starving. And I was starving for rest, for softness, for someone to hold me for once and ask nothing in return, for solitude that wasn't filled with guilt, for a day, just one, where I didn't have to manage everything, fix everything, anticipate everything before it broke. Starving for peace. I started noticing little things in the weeks after that night. I noticed how tired I was, even after a full night's sleep. How loud the world felt, my husband's TV shows, my friends' group chats, the phone calls I didn't want to return. I noticed how I would stand in front of my closet and feel nothing for the clothes inside. Nothing sparked joy, as the books say. Not because I hated the clothes, but because I couldn't remember the last time I got dressed for myself. That was the turning point. Not dramatic. Just a quiet realization I didn't know who I was dressing for anymore. Not for my husband, not for my grown children, not even for coworkers. I had become invisible even to myself, and yet there was a strange kind of freedom in that invisibility. Because when no one sees you, you can finally start seeing yourself. The first thing I stopped doing was answering every call. It might sound small, it might sound selfish, but for me, it felt like rebellion. My phone would light up names I loved, people I'd always been there for, and I would watch it ring and let it go. Not because I didn't care, but because I was tired of always being available, even when I had nothing left to give. Then I started saying no, not dramatically, just gently. A friend invited me to an event I didn't have the energy for. I said I'd love to see her another time. A coworker asked if I could cover her shift because she just needed a break. I smiled and said, so do I. At first, I felt guilt, heavy and sharp, like I was disappointing people, like I was letting go of a version of myself they counted on. But underneath the guilt, there was something else, relief. Relief that I no longer had to pretend I was bottomless, that I didn't need rest, that I didn't carry pain, that I didn't long for something more than this endless cycle of caretaking, coping, and pretending. And it was around that time that I remembered something I'd read once in a Buddhist book I kept in the back of my shelf, something about the bowl being holy because it is empty, because in its emptiness it can receive. That idea wouldn't let me go. What if my emptiness wasn't failure? What if it wasn't weakness or burnout or collapse? What if it was sacred? I began doing something strange, almost secret. Each morning before I reached for my phone, I would go into the kitchen, pour myself a cup of tea, and sit down at the table. I'd light a single candle, and I'd whisper, "This moment is mine." That's it. Nothing fancy, nothing Instagram-worthy. Just 10 minutes of breathing, staring out the window, and reminding myself I am not just someone's wife, a mother, employee, listener, fixer. I am someone. And that someone deserves peace. You'd be surprised how much 10 minutes of silence can change a day, how it begins to reshape the way you think of yourself, the way you inhabit your own body again. I started noticing my own voice again. It was shaky at first, quiet, like a woman who hadn't spoken for years clearing her throat in a chapel. But she was there, inside me, not gone, just buried beneath the debris of decades of doing. She asked strange questions. What do you want? What do you miss? What do you need? And at first, I didn't know the answers. I had been a mother, a partner, a provider, a peacemaker. But I hadn't been me in a very long time. It was like meeting a childhood friend after years apart. Familiar but distant. So I started with little things. I bought a journal and gave myself permission to write badly in it. No goals, no structure, just truth. On the first page, I wrote, "I am tired of being strong," and it felt like a door opened. I remembered I liked poems. I remembered I used to paint little watercolor flowers. When I was younger, not to sell, not to post online, just for the joy of mixing color. I remembered I loved the smell of books, the kind with pages that crackle a bit when you turn them. I remembered how much I missed walking alone at sunset without earbuds or errands. That's the thing about emptiness. When you finally make room, something always returns. It doesn't rush in like a parade. It comes softly, one gentle step at a time. I began to feel moments of stillness that weren't heavy. Emptiness that didn't feel like failure. Just space. Space to feel again. Space to want again. Space to not apologize for needing something back. I didn't tell anyone at first. This healing, this slow refill of the bowl wasn't loud. It wasn't for show. It wasn't an announcement. It was mine. But people noticed. My daughter called and said, "You sound different." My husband asked if I wanted to go for a walk with him. He hadn't done that in years. A friend left a voicemail. "I know you've been quiet, but somehow you feel more present than ever." I didn't explain. Because this part of the story, this middle, this becoming, didn't need justification. It needed protection. Like a candle in the wind, it needed a cupped hand around it. And I gave that to myself. What I was learning, slowly, humbly, is that I wasn't empty because I failed. I was empty because I had been generous. And now, it was my turn. Somewhere in that slow, unfolding return to myself, I realized I didn't want to go back to who I was. That version of me, the over-functioning, over-smiling, over-giving woman, was built on love, yes, but also on fear. Fear of being seen as selfish. Fear of letting others down. Fear that if I stopped holding everything together, it would all fall apart. But here's the part no one told me. Some things need to fall apart. Some roles need to be released. Some identities outgrow us. And sometimes we outgrow our own silence. I began to understand that the giving I used to do wasn't always kindness. It was often expectation, performance, a desperate attempt to earn worth in a world that taught me from girlhood that a woman is only as good as what she provides to others. But now I was rewriting that story. I didn't need to pour constantly to be valuable. I didn't need to be needed to be loved. I didn't need to serve to belong. What I needed was to honor my limits, to recognize that a bowl, any bowl, is still a bowl even when it's empty. Its shape, its dignity, its purpose remain. I stopped seeing rest as laziness. I started seeing it as medicine. I stopped seeing no as rejection. I started seeing it as self-respect. I stopped chasing everyone else's emergencies and started listening to the soft signals of my own heart. And yes, there were days I slipped. There were days the old habits returned, the rushing, the overthinking, the guilt. But now I caught myself, gently, like catching a child before she tumbles. I'd whisper, "You're allowed to rest. You're allowed to want. You're allowed to be. And slowly, the people around me began adjusting. Not everyone liked it. Some didn't understand why I was no longer the yes woman. Some pulled away, but others stepped closer, more honestly, more tenderly. My daughter said, "I want to be like you when I'm older, not just the giving you, the whole you." My husband, after a long walk in silence, reached for my hand and said, "I didn't realize how much you were carrying. I just assumed you were fine." I didn't need to say much, I just nodded. Because I was no longer performing pain for approval. I wasn't explaining my exhaustion like a defense. I was living it truthfully and letting my healing speak for itself. I also learned that giving looks different now. It's not always action. Sometimes it's presence. Sometimes it's boundaries. Sometimes it's the courage to say, "I love you, but not today. Today is mine." I started giving in ways that didn't drain me, like sitting quietly with a friend instead of trying to fix her, like smiling at the barista without rushing through the moment, like writing letters I'll never send just to empty my heart without spilling it onto others. I started understanding that the bowl my bowl is not for everyone. Not everyone gets to reach into it, not anymore. Because I've learned that I am not endless. I am not tireless. I am not a resource. I am a woman. And I deserve to be filled too. And so now when I wake up and feel the world pressing against me, I remind myself I don't owe everything to everyone. I pour when I can. I refill when I must. And I rest when I need to. Because that too is a kind of giving. I don't know who taught us to keep giving until we're empty. Maybe it was our mothers who were taught by their mothers. Maybe it was the culture that celebrates our strength but forgets our softness. Maybe it was survival, habit. Or maybe it was just what we believed love required. But now, here at this chapter in life, I know something else. We are allowed to be full. We are allowed to rest. We are allowed to set down the heavy bowl and say, "Not today." Not because we're giving up, but because we're finally giving to ourselves. So if you're listening to this and you're feeling tired in that deep soul-worn way, I want you to know you're not alone. You're not invisible. You're not selfish for wanting something left over for yourself. You've carried so much for so long, and maybe, just maybe, it's your turn now. Your turn to be seen, your turn to receive, your turn to be filled. And if this story touched something inside you, I hope you'll stay with me. Subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment if you feel like sharing your own quiet confession. Or just listen in silence. Your presence is enough. Together we can build a space where middle-aged women are not background characters, but the main story. Where our emptiness isn't shameful but sacred. Thank you for being here. You matter, still, again, always.